This recording will be available on YouTube, so anybody you know who wasn't able to attend tonight, the presentation component will be available on YouTube. The follow-on breakout groups will not be, because there will be multiple of them. But just to kind of go over a little bit of what we're going to be doing tonight, let me pull up the PowerPoint presentation. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, so for this evening, we appreciate that a number of you participated robustly during the earlier alternatives discussions, as well as a lot of our discussions in 2022. The purpose of this meeting is really twofold. One, we wanted to make sure that we kind of had a refresher. I know not everybody lives and breathes comprehensive planning like some of the staff do, so we wanted to kind of go over some of the core concepts as we start moving towards having draft documents available later this fall. A little later this fall than I had intended, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. The logistics for this meeting is that there will be a presentation at the beginning, hopefully 20, 30 minutes. I'm really hoping I'm not that long-winded, but we never know. And then from there, we are looking again to go into breakout groups. These are intended to be randomized breakout groups. All the breakout groups will have the exact same questions. And so no one will be missing anything by being in one or the other. We're hoping to have that for around 30 to 40 minutes. And then after we kind of run through those, we'll come back and kind of summarize what everybody has heard. Again, we're moving through this in a deliberate manner. So we want to make sure that people, again, are up to speed with the core aspects of the comp plan, as well as some of the big ticket items that are coming from staff's review of the land use, economic development, and housing chapters. But before we get to that part, I think we do have a couple of polls. They're a little bit demographic-ish. So can we start with the first one, Jade? Oh, the anticipation is killing me now. All right, we'll give another minute here for anybody who wants to respond. All right. So can everybody see the results? Looks like we have a good representation from North Kitsap. Central Kitsap is also here, and members of South Kitsap, as well as one person from outside the county. We really appreciate all of you being here. Jade, can you go to the second poll question? All right. Well, it looks like we have a good distribution. Whoops. Sorry about that. Good distribution. A lot of folks are getting this from our electronic media. That's very helpful for us to know, as well as it's also good to know that word of mouth is going on about the comprehensive plan that will be running through the end of 24. So, okay, so kind of going into what we're talking about here today. Come on now. So why is the comprehensive plan so important? I've kind of talked about this on a number of occasions. It is really the document that helps guide county actions over the next 20-year period. For us, that's through 2024. It directs growth, where we need infrastructure and what size of infrastructure, roads, sewer, etc. How are we going to handle the protection of our environment? The quality of life in Kitsap is critical, and the environment is a big piece of that. How are we going to protect our wetlands and streams as growth comes? Housing choices. This is becoming more and more important as we're finding that our single-family homes, which we have so many of, are becoming very, very unaffordable to large chunks of our population, whether it be young, whether it be old, whether it be people in lower income bands. So we really need to focus a lot more on how we're going to encourage those types of housing types, and then also many others, parks, and it goes on. It is important to note that the comprehensive plan that we're talking about today does not apply to city jurisdictions. All the cities have their own comprehensive plan processes going on. And then it also does not apply to tribal lands, either Port Gamble Sklallam or Suquamish lands that are owned by the tribe. So if you're inside the reservation, but you're living on private land, this comp plan applies to you. But if you're living on actual tribal land, it doesn't apply quite as much. And the comprehensive plans are required by state statute. The Growth Management Act has grown over the years. It has 15 goals now. It started with significantly fewer. All of these are intended to be balanced. They are not in priority order. I know everyone reads through them, and there's going to be some of these that are more important to each one of you than others. Staff and the Board of County Commissioners are going to be responsible for balancing all of those. So when we deal with urban growth and protection of the environment, how are we going to provide a dense community in places like Silverdale and Kingston while still providing for the environment? How are we going to provide jobs, and how are people going to be able to get to and from their homes, to their jobs, and to the services that they need? This is supposed to be based on local circumstances. So not any two comprehensive plans are intended to be identical, because every county is different, counties and cities are different, etc. So the Growth Management Act has a series of core concepts. The idea being is that urban areas are growth focused. That is where growth is intended to go. When we talk about additional people, jobs, and housing types, we're really talking about urban areas. Rural areas are the inverse. They're intended to be protected from growth. They're intended to be larger properties, rural types of jobs, and limited commercial opportunities, and those commercial opportunities should be targeted to rural property owners. And then we have limited resource lands. That's timber, agriculture, and mining. Our timber is the Department of Natural Resources land down by Green and Gold Mountain. Mining, we have some surface mining located at the Ulen Pit, a series along Dickey, around the county. And then lastly, we have small-scale agriculture, but not commercial agriculture the way resource lands are. So when you think about agriculture in the county, we're not really talking about resource lands. That's more of a regular rural activity as this comp plan looks at it. So yeah, largely urban services are located in urban areas: sidewalks, multifamily housing, and sewer. Those are generally prohibited in rural areas. You're not supposed to be seeing those because it provides pressure on growth to go into these areas, and also has an impact on property values, which is substantially an issue for certain folks in the rural areas who are finding themselves beginning to be priced out of their homes. The comprehensive plan has to be consistent with a series of regional plans. Vision 2050 is the regional plan for Kitsap, Snohomish, King, and Pierce counties. It establishes a whole number of goals about growth, equity, transportation, stormwater, and a whole list. And then after that, you have the countywide planning policies. That is more localized. That's our cities, our tribes, our largest ports in the county, and how we are going to handle growth in a consistent manner. Obviously, when you're driving through Kitsap County and you're driving through an urban area, sometimes you can't tell whether you're in the county or the city. It's important for us to have as consistent growth policies as possible, and we can move forward from there. One moment, I have a chat, and I want to make sure I don't have any technical difficulties. Generally, we're not looking at taking questions until we get into the breakout groups. So the countywide planning policies, it's required for us to be consistent with the countywide planning policies when we do our comprehensive plan. So it is really important that we focus heavily on those revised goals and policies. Growth management has added a number of pieces to it over the course of the last 2 years. We have a substantially more climate change requirements. Climate change is not going to be covered tonight. Climate change is intended to be covered on our meeting in September. Apologize for that if anybody is expecting some climate change discussion tonight. But also a lot about housing, a lot of top-down direction on how we should be providing housing and what types of housing we should be providing for what income band. So the comprehensive plan includes a number of different elements. Tonight, we're going to talk about land use, economic development, and housing. But there are other ones. There is environment, and again, climate change, like I mentioned previously, that'll be covered in September. But there's also the capital facilities chapter, which really is focused on how are we going to be able to turn on our taps and flush our toilets, and how are we going to have adequate schools and fire service, et cetera, to be able to provide for growth as it comes. The sub-area and neighborhood plans, they are also in the comprehensive plan. Certain communities like Manchester, Suquamish, Illahee have specialized plans that are focused on very specific components of their community and their community only. So we have a number of those as well. But tonight, again, we're going to talk about land use, economic development, and housing. So when I'm talking about growth, you might ask, how much is that? What do you mean? So again, we're talking about planning for growth from 2020 to 2044. Countywide, including our cities, we're looking at about 70,000 new residents coming to Kitsap County. Roughly today, we're around 275,000 people. Employment, we're looking at about another 46,000 jobs. And lastly, housing. Those 70,000 people are going to be looking to occupy around 33,000 new units. And what type of units are those going to be? Are those going to be the historic single-family homes that we have built for decades here in Kitsap County? Or how are we going to diversify that to ensure that there is more townhomes, duplexes, places for people to rent and own that are not as expensive as their single-family homes are at this time? So kind of moving into the land use chapter, again, urban areas are intended to accommodate growth. What you see here on this map is the 303 corridor, one of the areas that we're focusing a certain amount of growth, as well as Silverdale and Kingston. The land use chapter really focuses on, okay, where are the people going to live? Where are they going to work? And how are we going to accommodate that? How are we going to be able to protect the environment? How are we going to provide necessary
I don't know what else to do,
etc. This involves establishing urban growth areas. When I talk about urban areas, that just isn't anywhere in the county. That is a very specific boundary that is established that is urban on one side, it's rural on the other. Kitsap County has a lot of examples of 2.5 acre lots, 1 acre lots. Those were considered sprawl, and that was one of the things that growth management frowns upon. So now again, we have very rigid urban areas are roughly 5 dwelling units an acre or more, and then rural areas are roughly 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres or less. So it is a very clear distinction. When you look here on this map, you'll note that the yellow at the kind of the northeast portion of this map goes from yellow to green. Green is the rural area, yellow is the urban area. Urban is where growth is supposed to occur. That's how we establish urban growth areas for residential, commercial, and industrial. So there is the need to provide for jobs, not just for people who are looking to shop at grocery stores, et cetera, but also the industrial type jobs. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then rural zoning. Once you get out into the rural zoning, we really need to focus on what is the appropriate lot sizes and what are the allowed uses. Again, we're supposed to be protecting rural areas from growth, which means that we need to ensure that those areas, again, are sized properly and that they aren't bringing a substantial number of people and a substantial number of trips into that area. So as we're kind of going through the land use chapter, we've been seeing a substantial focus of people, housing, and jobs. Really, what we need to do is we need to be focusing them not everywhere in the county. The county has a number of urban growth areas. Not all of them are treated equally. Certain areas like downtown Silverdale, Kingston, and the central Kitsap area that I just showed you along 303 are areas that we are really looking to focus the most number of people, housing, and jobs. So from that, we are looking at, again, building more up than out. trying to move away from the single family detached housing to provide some other opportunities that might be more affordable when constructed. We're also looking at expanding density and housing types in existing single family neighborhoods. People have heard about missing middle housing. That's a concept that really references townhomes and duplexes and triplexes, and allowing those to be built in areas that they weren't allowed to be built before. What this means is that means that single family zones, which Kitsap County has a large quantity of, isn't just single family detached housing under certain components of this comp plan discussion. It could be, again, those missing middle housing types, and wouldn't just apply to individual new housing developments. This would apply to vacant lots in existing neighborhoods. I want to make sure that I'm clear about that when we talk about this, because if you have a vacant lot in your neighborhood, there is pressure from the state, and a lot of discussion in this comprehensive plan is going to be how can those properties develop, and it may no longer be just a single family home. It may be a duplex, it may be a fourplex. We are also looking at expanding densities, allowing people to go up to 14 dwelling units an acre in these zones to be able to accommodate these different housing types. I just want to make sure that that is understood, because there's so much talk about we need to put more people in a particular area, and I think a lot of folks think that pretty much is just multifamily downtown Silverdale. It really is a potential for additional density to be put throughout our urban areas, including existing neighborhoods. And then as we are working through our housing targets, which were provided by Commerce, the Commerce housing targets are pushing the county strongly towards missing middle and multifamily housing. They, based upon what is affordable to certain income bands, those are the housing types that are closest to being affordable to rent or to own. Again, single family detached homes that we've all lived in for years is the kind of the core housing type, is at $480,000 a piece, is not affordable to people making 80%, 50% or less of median income. So some of the other core aspects that we're looking at is how and where should we expand transit services in urban centers. We talk about multifamily, we talk about these denser communities, but what we really need to talk about are what are the services necessary to make these successful. Putting up a multifamily complex with limited parking opportunities is not going to work without adequate transit. And that is transit within the community, not just between communities. We have a very robust system that gets people from Silverdale to the Naval Shipyard or Poulsbo to Bainbridge Island, but we don't have regular service that can get somebody who lives by the CK school campus to the hospital at regular intervals during the day. Only with that type of transit service can the multifamily and the densifying of some of these areas, accommodating more people in a smaller area, going to be possible. And then along with that, we need to talk about what regulatory changes and financial incentives are appropriate to spur redevelopment. We do have a certain amount of vacant land in Kitsap County. We do not have a lot of it, but a lot of when we talk about the redevelopment of Silverdale, we're not really necessarily talking about solely vacant land. We're talking about how we can make people who own the land think about their properties differently. They currently have a aging shopping complex. How can we get them to think, either through financial incentives or regulatory changes, on how that aging shopping complex could become a mixed use or a multifamily housing unit? How to convince people that is a good way to go into the future, which oftentimes involves people having to give up a check today for a larger check tomorrow. And some of this is going to be public-private partnerships, which I think a lot of folks support public-private partnerships. But I think there is this concern that public-private partnerships that make the private entity money are automatically bad. Public-private partnerships are intended to be a give and take. Private entities are supposed to see some form of benefit for the collaboration with the county, whether that would be working on affordable housing complexes or park structures or whatever. It is really important that we understand that public-private partnerships are going to be important. And no matter what I put in this comprehensive plan or what we put in this comprehensive plan, unless the property owners see that incentive, see that path forward to redevelopment, we're not going to be able to achieve, again, broader community interests like, again, addressing climate change and other things by putting more people in a smaller area. And then are there communities that have been neglected and need additional attention through an equity lens. I'll talk a little more about that in a moment, but we do want to ensure that members of our BIPOC community have not been improperly impacted by infrastructure improvements, either certain infrastructure improvements being put in their neighborhoods, or B, not having enough infrastructure or other facilities in their neighborhoods. This is something that is particularly important in places like King County and Pierce County, but something that we're also looking at very closely in the Kitsap comprehensive plan. So then you have economic development. The biggest components of economic development are what really is the county's role. We obviously establish zoning. We say where industrial areas can be, and that's commercial land and industrial land. So it isn't just, again, places where people are going to shop. It is, again, some of those industrial uses. Should the county be just, again, handling the regulatory aspect, or should we be taking a more activist role where we are acquiring land, we are developing land, and then we're selling off land to foster small business, foster larger businesses? How do we utilize that to catalyze efforts in downtown Silverdale? That has not historically been the county's role and carries a substantial amount of risk. And we're really looking at what some people's perspectives might be on that today. We have a strong Navy presence. Do we lean in to our strong Navy presence and focus only on industry sectors that are Navy-based? Or do we need to work on diversification in case someday the Navy is not with us, or the facilities are not as robust as they are today? This isn't just focusing on the number of jobs, but also types of jobs. It's about ensuring that we have primary jobs, but also having jobs that are available for people who are just entering the workforce. These need to be jobs in the medical communities as the St. Michael's campus grows in Silverdale. I've been talking a lot about how we're going to densify some of our downtown areas. One of the questions there is, okay, if we're going to be putting more residential and commercial close to one another, if not on top of one another, what are we going to do with industrial uses? Jobs or businesses that have a certain amount of noise. They may have a certain amount of smell. They have a lot of heavy truck traffic. You really can't have that in, again, a walkable residential mixed-use community. Where should those be located? And do they need to be located in every community, or do they need to be focused in particular areas that are close to infrastructure and to ensure that they can succeed? Investment in workforce development, that's college and trades. How can Olympic College, Western Washington University, as well as all our trade schools, be able to provide the jobs necessary, whether it is for military jobs, whether it is for other offshoots of the Navy, or it is a more diversified populace, so that some of the folks who are going to school here in Kitsap County can remain in Kitsap County and have a job. And then should we be focusing on relocation, bringing businesses into the county, or should we be focusing on the retention of jobs? Businesses such as Safe Boats, et cetera, who are homegrown. We need to make sure we're creating an environment for them to stay here. We can do both, but oftentimes focus on one or the other can be valuable. So moving into housing. Housing, again, like I indicated, is one of the primary focuses of this comprehensive plan. The Department of Commerce, as well as Vision 2050 and the countywide planning policies, are focusing on the need for us to have housing that is affordable for people making 80%, 50%, or less of annual median income. That's roughly around $87,000 for Kitsap County. That's 100% of AMI. So as you can, I'll let you guys do the math on 80, 50, and down. So from there, what we're looking at is we need to, again, figure out how we are going to make housing more affordable. And I'll talk a little more about that in a moment. We need to ensure there's equal access to housing, including expanding affordable housing. As we're talking about people making 30 and 50% of AMI, we are pretty much talking about needing to expand public housing options. We have a number of folks who are working in the nonprofit field, as well as our housing authorities that are doing an excellent job at this. We need to speed up the ability, as again, most of our housing is quickly getting out of the range of affordability. And then there's affordable housing, which is again, the public housing. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But it's also, how are we going to ensure that there's housing available for everybody, so that our kids have places to go, our parents have places to move when they find that their house is too big and they want to downsize. We need housing that is available for a number of different people and a number of different income bands, but also at a number of different stages in their lives, not just their very active and oftentimes highest earning periods of their lives, but also in those other periods. And then, just like everything else, we need to make sure we're integrating housing and services with our transportation network. Being able to walk around a community, bike around a community, and be able to take public transit takes the pressure off the roadways, takes the pressure off creating more impervious surface, so that we can, again, benefit the environment, benefit climate, but also benefit the health of a number of individuals. So going in a little more, I think I kind of covered a little bit of this. Affordable housing is addressing partially our homelessness issue. We have a number of folks who currently are without housing, period. This could be because of an illness. This could be because of a divorce. This could be a domestic violence situation. These folks are looking at challenges and are finding it difficult to find places and safe places to live. We need to make sure that we are addressing our homeless community, but we're also providing housing to create a future for folks who have no home. That goes back to the affordable housing units. We need to ensure that we're investing in new public housing and new, more affordable more affordable housing types, so that folks who are moving out of homelessness have a future, have a light at the end of the tunnel. Kitsap County does not operate public housing necessarily. That is the housing authorities and nonprofits, like I mentioned, but we can expand the opportunities. We do have an affordable housing sales tax that currently brings in about $5 million annually, and through a competitive process goes out to homelessness issues, but also really is focused on establishing new public housing and affordable housing options. Again, providing that home in our community for people to be able to live long-term, not moving from shelter to shelter in what feels like an endless cycle. We need to, again, fund those new affordable housing units, and we need to support our housing authorities. Kitsap County forgave $17 million worth of debt that the housing authority, the Kitsap Housing Authority, owed, so that we can, again, foster more units over the next 20 years rather than having that money coming into the county. We're removing barriers to homeless and supportive barriers to homeless and supportive service opportunities, making sure that homeless shelters, support services like employment, substance abuse are not necessarily so feared in our community. They are necessary. They are necessary entities. We need to locate them in areas where they can work with one another. We don't want to separate them all across our community where folks can't get the services they need while they're staying in a safe location. And we need to focus on how we can make that happen in places, again, like Silverdale, Central Kitsap, and Kingston. So I talked about housing affordability. This is really where we kind of get down to just the private developers thinking about their development differently. How can we convince private developers and private property owners to build housing that is denser, that more people can be accommodated in a smaller footprint, smaller units, not necessarily 3,200 square foot single family homes, but again, more 1,200, 1,500 foot, the equivalent of starter homes, both for rent and for ownership. How can we get more of this housing stock in the community, with the idea that this is where the incentives and regulatory revisions are probably necessary to convince people to think differently about their properties? I do want to hammer on the fact that this is a private development base. So it really is focusing on people who are not the government, people who are not the community necessarily, to think differently about their properties. So housing affordability, as we're going through the comprehensive plan, we're looking at, while the market drives the costs, we are a piece of the puzzle. Government regulation is a piece. And we need to make sure that we are working with the pieces to help the market move along. The county cannot guarantee affordable housing. It cannot guarantee housing affordability. It can play its role, and the county is working on doing that. And some of those is, again, increasing allowed densities in urban areas and increasing heights in Silverdale and Kingston. So instead of capping out density at 30 dwelling units an acre, portions of Silverdale could be up to 60 dwelling units an acre, or in certain areas, not have any density limit and only be capped by the allowed height. That provides greater flexibility for developers to, again, think differently about their properties. Revise regulatory requirements that might be unnecessary or require a significant cost for the benefits they provide. I want to be clear, this does not mean we're removing safety measures from development. People need to be safe in their housing, but if there is a current process that someone who's developing a multifamily complex has to go through today, that is not necessarily drawing a necessary benefit, yet taking months, and with those months, thousands of additional dollars that, yes, the developer is funding, but we know where those are going to go. They're going to go onto the price of the units. The price of the units get passed along to the residents, whether it be renters or owners. So we need to find a way that that construction can get from day one to doors opening as fast as possible and as cheaply as possible if we want to expand opportunities beyond what we see today. Some of that may include expediting permitting for multifamily and affordable housing projects. If we really want to see a housing type in certain areas we've never seen before or have seen very sporadically in areas like downtown Silverdale, we need to think about how we can make the developers interested, and expedited permitting is a good example of that. And then lastly, we also have property tax incentives. The multifamily tax exemption allows jurisdictions to help the developer think about the property differently by not having to pay taxes for a certain period of time. And that's property taxes for a certain period of time. That then can help them invest in the property. And again, with the idea being that some of these properties are making money today, we need some kind of mechanism to help people think about that, the bigger check that they could get later, and the benefit that new development is going to bring to the community. Again, the private entity needs to be able to make these projects pencil, but we also need to see the public benefit from it. And if affordable housing is important, if housing diversity is important, if multifamily and having robust communities is important, some of these mechanisms may be appropriate. These are just some examples of some of the housing types. When I'm talking about missing middle, you're seeing some of those right now. So when I talk about vacant lots in existing neighborhoods, duplexes stacked, duplexes side by side, and cottage courts could be some examples of that. Low-rise multifamily is another example. You're probably not going to see that except for in more urbanized areas along the 303 corridor, Silverdale, Kingston. That again is more 2-3 story construction. Then you have mid-rise multifamily. Now you're getting into the 4 and 5 story realms. Accessory dwelling units. That is something that I think has been strongly encouraged, if not outright required, for jurisdictions to accept. In all of our urban areas, that is people able to put a apartment over the top of their garage, an apartment in their backyard. What you see there is an image as an example. And then on the other side, you have townhomes. Townhomes, again, are connected attached housing, 3 or more. Those could be options. Again, those houses come in at a lower price point to rent and own than single family construction. So I'm going to kind of close here in a little bit. We're really focusing on equity in this update, ensuring that our BIPOC communities, our tribes, etc., are well considered in our comprehensive plan. Kitsap County, unlike other jurisdictions, does not have as much of a geographic focus with our BIPOC community. They don't live in particular neighborhoods. They live around all of our urban and rural communities. They are well spread out. We have a good percentage of our BIPOC community in Kitsap. They just are not geographically focused. So when we think about how we are going to address equity issues, we need to think about it more demographically. What are the impediments to the BIPOC community in accessing government, accessing housing, both public housing and private housing? How can we expand transit options? Again, within communities, not just between. Not everyone can afford a car. We need to ensure that everybody in our community has the ability to get to the services they need. We need to assess the health impacts. We talk about denser urban areas. That oftentimes is going to mean more buildings and more impervious surface. How do we ensure that there are parks? How do we ensure that there's still trees in the area that Kitsap County has kind of been built on, that natural environment? How do we do both at the same time? Kitsap County, along with a lot of the other things I've talked about tonight, has done an internal gap analysis with our regional plans to see where Vision 2050 and the countywide planning policies suggest we do things in a very different way than how our 2016 comprehensive plan suggested. So public outreach, we've been going through this process for some time. I do want to make sure that people are aware that the Kitsap County webpage is regularly updated. We have storyboards there that help provide pictures to a lot of our goals and policies to help them be more understandable. We also have email and social media, and trying to do as many virtual and in-person meetings as possible. So in the last phase, you saw more of me than you wanted, both virtually and in person. We tried to have open houses as well as meetings like this. But also, the county is very interested in going to where people are to have presentations. Not everybody can come, even if we have floating virtual meetings all the time. Some people don't have technology. Some people don't have comfort with technology. We do want to make sure that we are making ourselves available to have these discussions with members of the community where they are, their own meetings, their own locations. And if anybody in this meeting has interest in those, please let us know. We are willing to come out and talk to you about the interests of your community and the ones that are most important to you. And then lastly, we have our standard public hearings. Everybody remembers the public hearings. You go down to the courthouse, you talk to the commissioner for your 3 minutes, and you provide written testimony. Also a tried and true mechanism, but it is the last step in this process, not the beginning. So we have this upcoming meeting, and then for people who are really interested in climate change, the environment, and transportation, please tune in September 14th at 6 p.m. There'll be another meeting. I promise it will not include me talking. So it'll be other people doing some discussion of, again, climate change and environment. Those meetings, again, are intended to kind of provide that kind of refresher, but also talk about some of the key issues that we see as we develop a climate change element, which we've never had before, and then also update our environment and address transportation. So this is one thing I do want to highlight, is there is a difference on this. This is our revised schedule through the end of 2024. This meeting is, again, we're kind of getting pretty close to the halfway point. But we are running this through December 2024. That is our end date. Previously, we had hoped to get a revised comprehensive plan, county code, environmental impact statement, and the capital facilities plan out in October. It was intended to be a Halloween treat. Unfortunately, with some issues we've had with going through our analysis to make sure that our transportation and our capital facilities are as accurate as possible, we have had to delay the release of those documents to December 15th, 2023. So no Halloween treat. Instead, you get a holiday gift of some kind or another. We promise after those documents are released, we are not going to be having any public meetings through the holiday season. We are hoping that folks will have the opportunity to digest some of those materials over the holidays. And then we will begin outreach on those documents in earnest at the beginning of January, again, continuing to April, August, and December of 24, where other decisions are going to be made. So I just want to highlight the fact that you've heard me say repeatedly that October 31st is when we're looking to release documents. The new date is December 15th, and we really appreciate everybody's patience. So with that, I'm going to stop talking, and we are going to go into breakout groups. Again, these are going to be randomly selected. Jade is going to work his magic, and staff is going to work through a few questions, but also really trying to get feedback from you folks on what is most important to you in this comprehensive plan update as it applies to housing, economic development, and land use at this time. So with that, can you break us out, I guess, is the way to say it? Jade, that is.
Everybody.
I think I accidentally left the group I was supposed to be in. How do I get back?
I'll go ahead and try to put you in. Are you Dave?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And I'm Rod, and I tried not to join a group, but I somehow got picked into this group. Can I somehow be evicted? Thank you.
Jade, can you let us know? Jade, can you let us know when you think everybody's back?
Hey, Eric, it looks like you're about full.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. All right, so for folks who may not have had the opportunity to participate in the breakout groups or just want to have another avenue to more robustly respond to the questions, what you're going to find in this PowerPoint and in this video are 3 slides that include all the questions, which for the people who were in my group, they're going to be very disappointed because we got through almost none of them. So yes, they would be these 3 slides. If you, after you have the opportunity, you can pull these up and you can respond to any of these questions that move you, I guess, at this point. So, all right. With that, let's kind of go around. Who wants to speak for Melissa? Who wants to speak for your group? The idea here is just to kind of report out any major themes that came from the discussion.
We didn't really get any much further than you did, it sounds like. We talked about, we hit the land use questions, but we talked about economic development. We talked about transit issues. We talked about housing, basically. How do we incentivize things? So I can get back to my notes. I was trying to finish some of the things that I had gotten in chat. And currently folks are concerned that existing multifamily is too expensive. And how do we get infrastructure expanded in existing urban growth areas so that we can have infill? That was one of the big topics as well.
Fantastic. Let's see, who was in group number 2? Was that Colin or?
I believe we were group number 2, yes. So yeah, we got through mainly land use and a bit of economic development as well. A lot of answers to the first question. So we talked for a while about the growing tension that there is between this growth that you talked about in your presentation and the need to retain rural quality of life. And also acknowledging that there's tension with critical areas in urban areas. So wanting to, focus both on protecting rural, but also protecting those critical areas that are already in urban areas. We talked about existing infrastructure and needed infrastructure in urban areas. That was a transportation system that actually connect these urban growth areas that can is multimodal and puts less pressure on roads. Also, kind of just the more coordination between capital facilities, for example, like in Kingston, having kind of the separation between the school and planned land use and not having good transportation between was a concern. There's an interesting point brought up about mobile home parks being a affordable housing option in the county, and how are we thinking about that or zoning for that. And then the issue of permitting and what obstacles are we removing at the county level for permits to be a little quicker and not be a barrier to development or housing. And then in economic development, we talked a lot about needing to train more in the trades. That's our affordability issues are also linked to, we need to have people trained in the trades and partner with those that are doing that. A focus on agritourism, different scales, but small scale agritourism as well. And of course, we know the shortage in healthcare, so focusing on healthcare jobs. And that's the quick report out from us.
Excellent. Did we have 3 or were there 4 groups?
4.
There are 3. I was number 1.
Oh, 3. Okay.
Carla, was there anything that you wanted to add to Melissa's report out?
Yeah, so I was in a different group than Melissa.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, you guys trusted me to have my own group. So
All right.
So the biggest thing we got through a few of the land use and some of the economic development. We did not get to the housing questions, although I feel like we sort of had some housing discussions in some of the other questions. So some concerns about the sprawl, biggest land use issue being sprawl, not enough wild areas with like native vegetation and green space. And then specifically green space not being addressed with new development. And then some safety issues with development as far as road structures and traffic patterns go with some of these bigger developments. And then housing affordability. And then for some of the specific jobs that were missing in the community, my favorite was county staff. So I wanted to just throw that out there. I wrote it down in my notes. But medical, construction, ferry workers, childcare, climate change related type jobs, environmentally responsible type jobs. So those came up. And then a couple differencing of opinions as far as like, should the Navy be considered through economic development? Some were pro, some were not. And then the county's role in our economic development. There was some discussion about county-owned land for affordable housing to ensure that the land or the housing stayed affordable. And that there may be some county land provided for the unhoused with services for them as well. And then making sure that we establish our zoning and zoning regulations to guide the private sector in their development to encourage them. So there was some talk about some incentives. And then regarding the industrial businesses and the housing question, there was some talk about the isolating the industrial uses from housing, and then more specifically along the Highway 3 corridor was the suggestion there. So, but that was sort of, there was some more, but that was the general feedback.
All right. Well, it sounds like that was 3 groups, which leaves me as the 4th one. I'm happy that it wasn't just me who struggled to get through the numerous questions, though I think I probably did get through the fewest. The biggest components that came out of my group was, again, the protection of environmental features, both outside the UGAs and inside the UGAs. Really some concerns about no net loss and how that has just been a slow bleed of environmental loss over time, and that we really need to be focusing more on net ecological gain. Some concerns that as the large timber companies leave the county, what they're going to leave in their wake. What will those properties become after they've either been logged and sold off, as if timber is no longer going to be a long-term future. Transit service, some impediments to transit service, including and walkable communities or super blocks, and just the amount of parking we have in places like Silverdale and the 303 corridor. So much opportunity is lost through there that is not maximizing the land, which again, maximizing the land is something that's very important to make transit service pencil out. Concerns about short-term vacation rentals and how short-term vacation rentals are kind of taking away from housing opportunities, either affordable or otherwise, affecting our overall supply. Really want to protect and maintain our history in a lot of ways, as well as foster local builders, not just large conglomerates coming in, building and leaving, and not necessarily caring about the community afterwards. A lot of concerns about rural rezones, as well as just general spot zoning that may have happened in the past, and not wanting to see that to continue. And then as we're talking about connections, pedestrian and bicycling, it really is providing connections to schools for folks. We have so many people who are going to be moving to this community, whether they're living in multifamily complexes or in single family homes. They need to have the opportunity to be able to walk or bike to school safely, which some of our communities kind of struggle to do at times. We had a few individual asides. questions about how the county is going to determine housing AMI. Will it be countywide? Will it be by particular community? And then again, some questions about the proposed South Kitsap High School down in the McCormick Woods area. So I really want to thank everybody for coming. Again, we really do encourage folks to answer the questions that we have on these slides. We'll also make them available on the county webpage for people who don't want to go back through this again. Instead, they can go and they can just pull them up and then again provide commentary. We do have, let's see, a couple minutes left. I think we do have one general question from Rob Gilby.
Yes, in our group 4, and this is like ancillary to the density and population growth, but there were 2 members in our group who are affiliated with the Kitsap Conservation District who were concerned about farm.
Yeah, you went on mute, Bob.
Yes, ancillary to all the population growth issues is there were 2 people in our group that were affiliated with the Kitsap Conservation District who are concerned about preserving ag areas as the trucks arriving across the Tacoma Narrows Bridge from the from California begin to get strained. Let's not discount that entirely. I know that walkability and increased density is good. Those are important topics, but do not lose our reliance on food and more reliance on local food. So please take a note of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And to close out our evening, Lisa Peterson.
Wait a minute, it's actually going to be Dave Peterson because he had this down and I say it right. So go ahead, Dave.
I just wanted to mention to the group that infrastructure was brought up, and before anything is done, infrastructure is the most important thing that you can have to develop any community, in my opinion. And what I've learned from my 30 years here in Kitsap County, and with all the people that love to come over here because of what we have, but I've noticed that infrastructure pretty much kind of failed, and I'd like to see more money spent on the infrastructure before any decisions made on the comprehensive plan, because that's part of the most important thing. There was a little confusion earlier about this. I guess it was ID number 2, the zoning of the Bond Road area, about the one plot for the YMCA, and then the rest would be basically turned over to rural residential. What I want to point out in that is Kingston is 1.9 square miles, which equals 1,216 acres. That's just Kingston alone. And as far as the urban growth areas, and I completely agree that those areas should be closer to the cities rather than rural areas because of several reasons, but that includes aquifer, et cetera. I can't get into that. But if Kingston is 1.9 square miles, that's 1,216 acres. So that rezone right above there that you're talking about for those 400 acres, that is 1/3 the size of Kingston. That is going to have a major impact on everything regarding your impervious surfaces, amount of contamination. Again, it all goes to what a lot of the people already mentioned regarding the housing. It's the natural beauty that brings people that kept me here. So I just wanted to mention that, and I want to thank everybody for giving me a chance to mention that.
Thank you.
You have to remember that we only have so much land.
Thank you.
That is all we have.
Thank you for letting us do it.
No problem. Thanks. We do have one final question about continued public outreach. As we're going through this process, you can provide written testimony, written commentary through our Kitsap County webpage, which let me clear to it, at compplan@kitsap.gov. Also, all written comment that comes in will go to the Board of County Commissioners for their consideration. Also, there will be future meetings, but I do understand if people really want to have the opportunity to speak or write more directly to their elected officials, in which case the comprehensive plan webpage is the best way to do that. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and I do want to remind everybody on September 14th, there will be another one of these focused on environment, climate change, and transportation. Good news is I will not be presenting, and there are much more engaging presenters who will be taking on that topic. And we really hope that you folks will get the word out about that meeting and join us again on the 14th. With that, everybody have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Drive safely if you're driving anywhere.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. That was